Hey everybody, Bob Chick back with another installment of The Voice of Bodybuilding. It is cold here in Savannah, Georgia. That's why I've got the Panada hoodie on and representing the O. Of course, all roads lead to the Olympia, including today's subject, which is the conspiracy theories. And they have come out in full swing ever since I put my opinions out on the Arnold, Nick Walker, Big Ramy, my opinions on what they should do with their careers, with the next shows, with whatever. These guys come out in full force. I gotta love it because the amount of theories and conspiracies and conjecture and all these other things that everybody brings, it never comes down to just one simple fact, which is could it be that your guy, whoever it is that you're a fan of, whether it's Nick, Samson, whoever, in this case it's whoever lost, could it be that they just weren't good enough? Could that be possible? Can anybody ever accept the fate that somebody else was just better on that day? And before we get into the history of the conspiracies, in particular of the Olympia, let me just say this because I have seen some various interviews and things that Nick and others have put out there. It's all pretty regular. Listen, concerning Nick Walker, I don't blame him for being pissed off that he didn't win. He's a competitor. He should be pissed off. I would have been pissed off, too. He went in there to win the show, $300,000, an Arnold Classic title in his pocket. Another victory en route to the Olympia, his road to the Olympia, and he didn't win. I'm not expecting to be happy about it. I'm not expecting anybody to be happy about losing. So let's not fault him. I mean, all you guys coming out there saying he's a poor loser and all that. Listen, this is professional sports, okay? If he was happy about it, then he shouldn't be doing it in the first place. Now, that said, I have seen some speculation on various outlets and podcasts thinking that just because they feel, and we'll get into their feelings in a minute, that their guy was 100% or they nailed it or whatever, that doesn't necessarily mean they were good enough to beat the other guy. The percentages are not equal across the board, everybody. Let's just take this in particular. Everybody thinks, well, Nick nailed it. He was dead on. He was 100%. He might have been. Let's just say for the sake of this conversation, he was 100%. His 100% in this case was not better than Samson's 95%. Now, we're just applying arbitrary numbers, but you guys get where I'm going with this, okay? Everybody's got shortfalls in bodybuilding. Nick is very dependent on what the other guys bring to the table. If he brings 100% every time, it's going to really depend on what the other guys bring in terms of they have better shape, structure, proportion. That automatically gives them an advantage. That's why I said in the previous podcast that Nick needs to bring the freak factor. That's what he brings to the table. If he does bring it, he's always going to be a force. He's very consistent, as I've given him plenty of kudos in the past. And he's going to probably continue to be so. And he will make progress as he goes. He's a very young man. And he's done very well in a very short period of time. So let's not get on these guys' asses too much when it comes to, their attitudes or, whether they, listen, he doesn't wish Samson any bad. All these guys compete. They travel together. They do appearances together, just like many of the pros have done, in the past. So, give him a break, okay? That's what I'm saying. Concerning Big Ramy, first of all, let's put the first thing to rest. Conspiracy number one. That Big Ramy lost because he didn't show up in Pittsburgh to do a guest posing at Jim Mahanion's Pittsburgh Pro. This is just laughable. Is this really what you guys have got to cling to? Is that you think Jim, of all people, you think he gives two craps who shows up at his guest posing? I got news for you. A lot of people aren't able to make it for various reasons, whether they're booked on that date for a various guest posing, signing, appearance, something for their company, whether they can't make it into the country, whether they just feel like they're not in condition or shape, to be showing up on any stage, let alone gyms. Okay? He invites a lot of people. It's usually the top 6, 7 Olympians. It's been kind of a tradition now for many years. But and to this date, I don't really know why Ramy couldn't make it. I know he did put out a video or two back then explaining the situation or apologizing for the fact he couldn't make it. But to actually think that there is some conspiracy to take him out of position because he didn't show up for guest posing is ludicrous. It's just comical at best. But you guys got to do better than that. This other notion that the judges are looking at a new direction now. They're looking at Romney's the thing of the past. Now they're onto a new direction, as if there's a big meeting that takes place. If there is, I'm not a part of it. In which case I'm a little pissed off. I'd like to be a part of these meetings in the future, IFBB Pro League. That there's a different direction, different vision for bodybuilding. Oh, they want to go in a different direction. Who's they? Number one, the judges judge whoever shows up on stage. They pick the best bodybuilder on that day, whatever division it might be, in their opinions. It's that simple. There's no new direction. The direction is the same as it's always been. They want the most perfectly developed person on that stage to meet the criteria, and they will put them in the winner's circle. As I've explained before, a lot of times this person doesn't exist. So they pick whoever looks the best that day in comparison to whoever else is on stage that day. There are various degrees of levels of competition over the years. I think we would all agree. Whether that's 10 years ago, 5 years ago, last year, doesn't really matter. The reason that Big Ramy lost is Big Ramy did not bring his best. Anybody who sees anything differently, you need to pick a different sport to follow because you have no idea what you're looking at. If you can't see the changes, yes, everybody does change over time. What's that got to do with the judges? The judges don't care about what you feel. The judges don't care about what you used to look like. Okay? They care about one thing and one thing only. What do you look like on stage that day against everybody else? So I hope that puts at least this modern conspiracy theory to rest. There is no conspiracy. There is no action going on. Nobody's trying to keep anybody out of the winner's circle. And then it has to benefit somebody. Again, we'll get into delve into the history in just 1 second. But before we get there, in order to prove a conspiracy, there has to be a rationale or reasoning behind it. Otherwise, what's the point of it, right? So as we go through and we diagnose some of the history of the sport, at least in terms of the Olympia, and there are some golden moments here. Listen, do I agree with all of them? Absolutely not. For those who think I'm a company man and all that stuff. First of all, I'm not employed by the company, okay? Never to this day has there been a check from the IFBB Pro League written to me or one of my business ventures or anything for that matter. So there is no on the payroll or I just suck up to the Pro League or Jim Mannion or whatever else you guys like to throw at me for any good reason. I don't work for Jim Mannion. I don't work for the Pro League even. Even in my athlete rep capacity, I represent the athletes, not the federation. Some things might benefit the federation, as they should. They should benefit mutually the IFBB Pro League and the athletes. That's why I've come up with the things I have over the years. And we can delve into that a whole nother time, different podcast. Right now, I want to attack some of these things. As usual, this segment is brought to you by Redcon One and our good friends at Panada Sport. We're going to be coming up with a whole bunch of features on both those great companies in the very near future. But as always, we appreciate their support. And as always, folks, if you like what you're hearing, if you like getting the real truth out of bodybuilding, minus all the bullshit, minus all the catchphrases and the clickbait and all that stuff, please continue to subscribe below. You see the button right there. You can hit it. And I appreciate everybody that's come out in support of the voice of bodybuilding. All right, let's get right to it. From day one, there's always been a conspiracy when it comes to bodybuilding. But that didn't really come around until much, much later in the program. If we just take the Olympian, we're going to kind of breeze through this so this isn't too long for you guys. 65 and 66, first 2 years of the Olympia, winner, Larry Scott. Now, when we talk about the old days, there really wasn't a lot of competitors. For those that like the history of bodybuilding, all right, from 1965 until 75, all right, the good 10 years, there's literally a handful of guys that compete. And a couple of those years literally went uncontested. All right, we'll talk about that in another podcast. We talk about some of the history stuff. But there's a handful of guys that compete against each other, and there's not really a lot of dispute that goes on in those 10 years. First two Olympias, Larry Scott, great winner. Again, he didn't have a lot of people to compete against. Earl Maynard is one of those guys in the early days. Harold Poole was a fantastic competitor. Actually, the most muscular, the modern day most muscular is actually accredited to Harold Poole. They actually call it the Poole pose. Way back in the day, even though some other guys had actually, hit what we consider a most muscular pose, but he kind of perfected it and made it his own. So no dispute there. 67, 68, 69, Sergio. Nobody disputes this. Nobody was even close to the myth. There's a reason they call him the myth. His genetics are amongst the best of all time. You can't dispute it. We don't really get into a dispute until 1970 when Arnold wins. He beats Sergio. I mean, could you make a case? You could, but Arnold was Arnold. I mean, come on. I mean, this was a very young Arnold as he came in, but a very formidable one. So it's a toss-up. I don't really consider there was no conspiracy, certainly. Whether the judges picked it right or not, up for speculation. 70, 71, 2, 3, 4, and 5, Arnold. No dispute on any one of those victories. That's as dominant as any bodybuilder in the sport has ever been. Lee Haney would go on in much later years, we'll get into that, about how dominant he was during his run. But there was probably no more dominant run. Now, again, Arnold did not compete against a whole lot of people during those years. That's not Arnold's fault. There was a lot of stuff going on at that time with different federations, jockeying around for a position, different federations, politics, if you will, into that time frame. But none of that was Arnold's fault. He was competing for Olympias, earned every one of them. 76, Franco. Arnold hung him up, pumping iron. We all remember that. Franco stepped in with his buddy gone because Franco's winning the short classes all those years, getting beat by his buddy Arnold. I don't think anybody ever had Franco beating Arnold, much like the Nick Sampson comparison. And speaking of which, because I don't want to get off on a tangent here in the middle of this, but also it's brought up, and I still haven't had one reply in the positive on this. I threw out the other day the ultimate analogy, which absolutely destroys anybody's vision that Nick should have beaten Sampson on the Arnold stage. Did anybody have Rich Gaspari beating Lee Haney when he took runner-up to him a whole bunch of times? Anybody? I'm waiting for one person to say that they had Richie Gaspari beating Lee Haney, and then you got a different argument. Until then, pretty much puts the nail in the coffin on that one. 77, 78, and 79, Zane. Ushered in a different era. Mass Monsters were gone. Lou went on to the Hulk. Arnold went on to make other movies. Zane, I was never a big Zane fan. I always thought he needed more muscle, but he did bring the conditioning, which was a different era at that point. Robbie Robinson takes runner-up to him a few times, and Mike Munster, I believe, in 79. But not really disputable. Zane, dominant in those 3 years. Whether you like him, don't like him, anything in between, you got to give him his due. The look he brought, the professionalism, the display of posing, all that, top-notch, can't take it away from him. 1980, now here's where things get fun. Okay, this is where it kind of starts. Arnold winning, coming back after a 5-year absence, winning the 80 Olympia when nobody knew he was coming in, and a subpar Arnold. Was he anywhere close to his best? His best arguably being 74, 75. I think 74 pretty much takes that one. Listen, it wasn't the best Arnold we've seen, but it was still the best guy on that stage, I believe. Give me somebody better in 1980. The rest of the crew really wasn't that great at that time. Arnold, 90%, 80%, I don't know, take a pick, still beats those guys. Again, no dispute he wasn't at his best. But again, you don't have to be at your best to beat everybody else on that stage, okay? Arnold was still dominant, still great. Yes, he was light in the legs and all that, but I could pick out 10 flaws on every other competitor that was there that year also. So I'm not really chalking up as much as a conspiracy, only because of the next year, which is 1981, when Franco steps back in and wins. This, arguably today, probably not even arguably, I should say, is the biggest travesty on a bodybuilding stage of all time. 81 Franco, with all due respect to the departed, because I like Franco very much, was a far cry from 76. He had injured his leg during the World's Strongest Man competition, never really got his legs back. He had the gyno working. Again, legs didn't have any cuts in them. This was not a great Franco Colombo, but he had no business being in the winner's circle in 81. And you could have picked from a multiple of people, whether it be Roy Callender, whether it be Tom Plants, and most notably, the Giant Killer, the original Giant Killer. I know a lot of people calling themselves Giant Killer these days, but he was the originator, and he earned that nickname for a good reason. He should have won the 81 Olympia, in my opinion. By the way, side note to that, of all the judges Of all the judges in the 81 Olympia, who's the only one? They have Danny Padilla in first place at the 81 Olympia. The answer is Jim Mannion. So for all you conspiracy theorists out there, Jim didn't even have Franco winning at that competition. He had Danny Padilla, which I think a lot of people to this day think he could have won. Danny really came in trim, ripped to the bone, perfect proportions. Should have had a Sandow in his mantle. But that wasn't so much for conspiracy or politics. A lot of people think Arnold had something to do with that. Listen, was it just a poor decision? Was it a nostalgic thing because he was Franco Columbu? I don't know. I wasn't there. I was a young kid, literally just getting into bodybuilding then. But this was not a good call. Chris Dickerson, I don't know. Frank Zane, Casey Viator, that show, not at their best either. I was never a Dickerson fan when it came to his physique. I think he might be the weakest Mr. Olympia that's ever been crowned. Again, up for debate for a future episode, but we'll give him his due. 83, Samir Bannout, beating Muhammad Makawi and Lee Haney, newcomer at that time, fresh off the national championships, world championships, and Lee Haney would emerge. You can't take anything away from Samir. He absolutely nailed it. One of the best physiques we've ever seen, complete, head to toe, beautiful display of posing. This guy finally hit it because Samir was always close, but he just couldn't wring that last bit of water out. And he finally did it, got himself a Sandow. Unfortunately, he would never repeat the same conditioning again. But 83, you got to give to him lock, stock, and barrel. Okay, now we get into the Lee Haney years. Now, I just said, Gasparri takes second, 3 years to Lee Haney, in reference to today's conundrum of this Nick Walker versus Sampson and why it applies. Nick Walker and Sampson are Lee Haney and Rich Gasparri all day long. This is just deja vu all over again, right? So Lee Haney is so dominant in his years. And he had some good competition. This ain't the old Arnold years where there was one or two competitors where he went unopposed. He's got some damn good competition. We had Mike Christian, Barry DeMay, Richie Gasparri himself. Later, obviously, in his career, Dorian Yates. I mean, he had a pretty good crew and earned every one of those, and arguably retires at 31 years old at his best. A lot of people have Lee's last victory as his best. He was still a young man. Could he have gone on? I don't know. I think he beats Yates handily the first time we saw Dorian Yates emerge. But again, very young Dorian Yates who had gone to make significant improvements. Could Lee have staved him off another year? We don't know. I think it was a smart time for Lee to get out, got out healthy, got out strong, top of his game, and then, turned his money and success into a career that he still has today in the Georgia area. I used to live about 20 minutes from Lee, so we used to get together a lot more since I moved to Savannah. But what a great champion. Dorian Yates, this is where things start to get a little hairy, folks, okay? 92 to 97, 6 victories to his credit. Very formidable competition. A lot of the newer era guys that would come out around here with Sean Ray, Kevin Levrone, Flex Wheeler, Lee Priest, Paul Dillette, Chris Cormier. You had some great competition that Dorian had to beat. And the first 2 years was dominant. He came out there, it was over. He brought in a combination of muscle and conditioning, especially from the back. You always hear that shows her one from the back. Well, he would have been one of those guys that ushered that phrase in, because when he turned around, it was lights out. Nobody was close. But then people do get close, and you can make a case. 94 Ray, I think Sean Ray beats him. Dorian, not the same Dorian that we saw in 92, 93. And you can make a case for Kevin Levrone. You can make a case for Nasser in 97. Nasser, straight up, I think he beats him. I hate to take, titles away from people. Again, you got your 6 victories, whether we agree or disagree. But there's 3 victories there, and especially the last one. He's beat up. Dorian's beat up. Biceps torn, midsections blown out. Had some other anomalies, some tears in his physique. That heavy-duty training, it caught up to him at that point. I don't see how they actually put him in place other than the king has new clothes. You've all heard that expression, right? The judges seen at that point a guy that they remembered being so dominant and great, but actually as he stood there on stage, he should have been being judged on his merits. Now, we've talked about this a little bit in the past about, is it fair to judge a bodybuilder on what he's looked like in the past versus what you see before you? And it's difficult. It's a human thing. If I see bodybuilder A and he looks phenomenal, and the next time I see him, he's not anywhere close to that, well, you can't help but judge him against himself because you've seen him in better shape. Now, yes, he still has to stand there next to other guys, and he still might be the best, but it's very, very difficult to not expect somebody to show up in shape or conditioning or whatnot that isn't conducive to the way they used to look. They show up lesser than, it automatically kind of sticks in the back of your head. And whether it's fair or not, it's human. Okay? So, yes, you should always be compared to whoever you're standing to on that stage at that time. But that is a consideration that we have to take in. So now we go through 98 through 2006, I believe it was. Ronnie Coleman. I mean, what can you say here? I mean, you talk about dominant. I mean, it's not even up for debate. Ronnie Coleman, as dominant as Lee Haney was, Ronnie Coleman's even more dominant. There were years in there, and it was just, I remember people leaving before the announcement even came, just shuffling out of the place because it was a foregone conclusion that Ronnie Coleman was going to win another Olympia. But I also saw a switch about 3 deep. And I've seen this with other Olympians too, whether it's Ronnie, Phil, whoever. People start to turn on the champ real quick in this game. I know people like to root on the underdogs, but I see this with other sports too, like Tom Brady. There's people that hate Tom Brady. This guy is the best, arguably, the best quarterback of all time in the NFL. Why would you hate the guy? You should be celebrating the guy that was so great that years from now they'll be looking back saying he might have been the greatest, if not already. Be it his individual performances, be it his Super Bowl victories, but can't take it away from him. But I remember around like Ronnie's 4th win, 5th win, people were booing. Booing. Now, they weren't booing, I think, because they thought maybe he should have lost. I mean, everybody's got their favorites, right? I think they were just booing because they wanted a new champion at that point. Talk about fickle fans. But Ronnie really doesn't get a challenge until 2001. And that's when Jay comes in. And Jay could have beaten Ronnie. He could have. He was ahead. If I'm not mistaken, if memory serves, he was ahead by 8 points going into the finals and then somehow loses the competition. But you could have made a case, and it wasn't so much that Ronnie was off, it's that Jay was so on that he did present a physique that was in consideration to beat the great Ronnie Coleman at that point. Now, for the conspiracy theorists out there, this is why I circle back to these type of things, okay? Would anything have been better for business than to have the incumbent champ, Ronnie Coleman, 98, 99, 2000, 3-time champion already. Now he can lose the competition. Is there anything better for business than if he would have gotten beat by Jay Cutler, who had taken runner-up to him already, beats the champion, and now you got a rubber match for the next year? You talk about ticket sales. If this is the conspiracies, they have a guy win 8 times in a row, and you think that's good for business, I got news for you. Then we're dealing with the dumbest bunch of people I've ever come across as a federation, as an entity. If this is what they thought was good for business, no, they just called it the way they saw it. Whether you agree or disagree doesn't mean there's a conspiracy. They didn't see Jay winning for whatever reason. I had him winning, all right, but that's me. Apparently the judging panel saw it differently. I don't care how many points that he had amassed. But the bottom line is it wasn't for any business reason. There has to be a reason behind a conspiracy, right? What's the reason? Was it better for ticket sales? No. You think a 4, 5, 6, 7-time champ is good for sales? Of course it's not. You can make the same argument in 07. 07, Jay's the champ. Victor comes in, right? So Jay finally got himself a couple of standouts. Now Victor comes in and people say, oh, Victor got screwed. He should have beaten Jay in 07. He was beating Jay in 07. The first round, I was there. I was right there. I had Victor winning when he came out. The problem is Victor faded. And as he faded with every successive round of posing, he faded. He got smoother and smoother and smoother, and Jay got stronger and stronger as he went on, looking better. What water he was holding was going out, and it flip-flopped. But I did have Victor winning in 07. But once again, I tell you the same thing. Oh, it's because Jay's with Muscle Tech. Muscle Tech's the main sponsor. Well, Jay won when he wasn't with Muscle Tech. They also said that no non-leader athlete would ever win the Olympia. And then what did Jay do? He went to MD, he signed with Blackman. And what did he do? He won the Olympia. So clearly those things are dead and buried. But again, poor judging decisions, or just one of those things where that's the way the numbers came out, or conspiracy. Well, we could pretty much wipe out the conspiracy because, again, if this is good for business, I don't know what to even tell you. I mean, there's any idiot who is writing this stuff up at WWE style would have Victor beating Jay. And then you got these two coming back, and we're selling tickets, and we're promoting, and this guy won, and that guy won, it. This guy beat that guy. We don't do any of that stuff. We've had successive people win multiple Olympias in a year after year basis. That is not good for business if that's what you're selling, unless the reasoning or the rationale is that's who they had winning. There was no thought of business, selling tickets, trumping up a rivalry type of a thing, because the next guy that you would have is Dexter Jackson. No dispute there. Jay was off. Dexter slipped in there, grabbed himself a standout. Good for him. Jay returns, wins a couple more, then boom, he's out. Then you got Phil Heath. Again, as dominant in his victories as Ronnie before him and as Lee Haney before him. Phil never really gets a challenge, really, until 2018 when he loses to Roden. Personally, did I have Roden winning? No. I actually had Phil winning. You could have made a case for Phil in 2010 when he takes on Jay. And a lot of people had Phil winning. I mean, maybe Phil could have equaled that elusive eighth Sandow if he won against Jay in that first year. And if he won against Roden, he obviously beats it. But that's not what happened. Again, was there a conspiracy to keep Phil out of the circle, out of equaling the record? No. Phil opened the door. He said that himself, midsection at that point, not as sharp as it used to be. Phil's still hanging on, but not as good as 11, 12, and 13 would have it. So Roden ends up beating him. And then into there, we get into the modern era of, Brandon Curry and then Big Ramy and Hadi Chupan, the current champ. So hopefully this sheds a little bit of light on the quote, conspiracies. But this notion that there's any higher ups, that there's any meeting of the pro league, of the people behind closed doors, the powers that be, having any influence on a direction of bodybuilding or why certain people win. Sometimes it's just a preponderance of the scoring system. Are there people that had Nick in first place at the Arnold? Probably. Are there people that had Andrew Jack in first place? Probably. I never saw the score sheets before. They took out the highs and the lows, so I don't know. I mean, we could have that conversation with some of the judges, but I can assure you that at the end of the day, they got it right. If Big Ramy comes back or not, we'll see. I'm giving them my recommendations. And when I say my recommendations, that's coming from me personally. I know, Nick Trigilli, you put out a thing on your podcast the other day talking about how you feel as though I'm speaking for the pro league, and the pro league sending a message to Ramy. Bro, I don't care what you feel, okay? This ain't about your feelings. It's about my facts, okay? So I don't speak for the pro league. I speak for me. That's my advices to Big Ramy. Whether he takes them or leaves them, that's up to him. And any of the commentary I put out there, this is not a pro league thing. This is a voice of bodybuilding thing, and that's me. So you can continue to feel however you want, but I can assure you, you've got no idea what you're talking about. So hope that wraps things up for this edition. As usual, keep those comments rolling in, folks. As you see, I try to comment and catch every single one of you. And one correction. For those that want to get on my case for the pictures that were put up, the comparison pictures of Ramy from the 10 years apart on the last podcast, okay? There was an error in loading up the photos, okay? Those are not the original photos that were intended. That's what ended up getting put up. Not a big deal, okay? So get off my ass about, you use these pictures. He's not even in the pose and all that. Go to my IG right now. Go to my Instagram. Got the blue check there. You can see that it's me, IFBB Pro Bob Chick. All right, you can find it. I put the correct pictures up just the other day. You look at those two pictures. You tell me that you can't see a difference, and not for the better, over the last 10 years, okay? But those are the pictures that were supposed to be loaded, just so we can get that clear, okay? So go to my IG, check it out. You can comment there. Of course, that's still going on as a conversation. So that's going to wrap it up for this week. We'll catch everybody next time.